Welcome to another episode of the program, Message of Grace. My name is Hussein, and I'm very happy to be with you. Happy that you could be with us today. And I'm also happy to have with me today my friend Jacob to kind of help us with the program. Thank you, Jacob, for being with us today.
Of course, good to be here.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to have you on, and so, yeah.
Thank you. Now, just wanted to know what the subject is today and why you picked the subject.
Well, today, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you is just because it's a little bit of a complicated subject, and it's a subject that I've done several programs on myself. But as you know, I translate your grandfather's programs, several of them from Arabic to English. And while I was doing one of them, I just was so impressed, as I usually am, with his wisdom and the depth of knowledge he has, from the hadith and from the Sirah Nabawiyya and everything about this subject. And so that's why I wanted to really do a program, because I feel it's important that these things that he says need to be communicated also to the non-Arabic speaking viewers, because we're not just Islam. While Islam came from the Arabic, Arabs only make up 300 million people, and the rest of the Muslim world, which is about almost 2 billion people, don't speak Arabic.
That's correct.
And so we need to communicate to them too. And the subject that I really wanted to talk about today, it's in English, it's called, in the Quran, it's called the Sab'a Ahruf, okay, which in English, the Sab'a Ahruf is 7 modes of the Quran.
Okay.
And then there's also another subject called is Sab'a Qira'at. And the Sab'a Qira'at in English is the 7 recitations of the Quran. So we have both the 7 modes of the Quran and the 7 Qira'at. And I've always been confused about it. A lot of people are confused about it. And so I just wanted to talk about it, and your grandfather clarified it the other day. And so I would just like to present some of the stuff that he said about the differences between the Qira'at and the modes, 7 modes.
Gotcha. Well, can you tell us generally what you mean by the 7 modes?
Okay.
And the 7 recitations?
Okay. Well, let's start with the 7 modes, which again, in Arabic, it's called the Sab'a Ahruf. And the 7 modes, if you look, if I could just say it plainly, just very simply, the 7 modes are 7 dialects of the Arabic. Okay, there were, in the time of Muhammad, there were several different dialects. It's a little bit different than saying a language. Like, it's not 7 different languages, but it's 7 dialects of the Arabic. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put up this insert right now, the first insert. And this is the 7 ahruf, the Sab'a Ahruf, the 7 modes or dialects that the Quran came down in. The first one is Quraysh, Hudayl, Thaqif, Hawazin, Kan'ana, Tamim, and Yemen. These are the 7 dialects of Arabic that the Quran, according to Muhammad, came down in. So,
gotcha. Well, I always thought the Quran was in one dialect or one language. How could it be in 7?
Well, that's, right there you just kind of got at the heart of this issue, and this is a strange thing. Okay, I was a Muslim. I was taught in school, and I was taught at home. I was taught by my relatives, by our community, on television, on the radio, that the Quran is one. And I can show you a ton of videos, where the sheikh is saying it's impossible from Morocco to India to America to South America. There is only one Quran. It is unchangeable, and it's unchanging. They say, and I remember when I was in school, they told us that the Injil, or the Gospel, has been changed. The Torah has been changed, but the Quran is unchanged. It is word for word, letter for letter. The way it's on what the Muslims believe in is called the preserved tablet. The preserved tablet is the Lawh al-Mahfuz in Arabic, and they believe there's this huge law, this huge board up in heaven, and it's got the Quran written on it. And that Gabriel would go up and read it, and then he would come down to Muhammad and tell him what was on the Lawh al-Mahfuz. And that the Quran that is in the Muslims' hands today is exactly what's on that Lawh al-Mahfuz today. And there's a verse in the Quran, it's chapter 15, verse 9. Every Muslim, or most Muslims know it. It's very famous, where Allah says that I have revealed the Quran and preserve it. That preservation, according to Muslims, is perfect. It is unfailing, unchanging. And so when you get that, and then you hear, wait a minute, if that's the case, there's one Lawh al-Mahfuz, how can there be 7 different dialects of the 7 different languages, these 7 different languages of the Quran? How could that be if the Quran is in one language? And so that's really the heart of this issue, you know. And I'm just going to put up this. I'm going to put up this second insert just because, you know, it is a confusing subject, and most Muslim scholars, when they talk about it, they don't help to make it any clearer. It's just a very strange thing. And I'm going to put up the second hadith insert, which is a hadith from Sahih Muslim. And so it's a little bit long, but let me just say, read it, just because. And when we say Sahih Muslim, this is the number 3 book of Islam. Okay, the number 1 book of Islam is the Quran. Number 2 book of Islam, Sahih al-Bukhari, which is the most respected of the hadith. And this is the number 3, or you know, the second most respected hadith, collection of hadith in all of Sunni Islam. And so, and this is what it says. Let me just read this to you. It says, the apostle of Allah, peace be upon him, was near the cistern of Banu Ghifar when Jibreel came to him and said, Allah has commanded you to recite the Quran in one dialect to your people. Upon this, he said, Muhammad said, I ask of Allah pardon and forgiveness. My people are not capable of doing this. He then came, this is Jibreel, came a second time and said, Allah has commanded you that you should recite the Quran to your people in 2 dialects. Upon this, he, the Holy Prophet, said again, I seek pardon and forgiveness from Allah. My people would not be able to do so. He, or Gabriel, came a third time from Allah and said, I'm sorry, I think I missed one of the pages. Okay, the second time, came for the third time and said, I asked pardon from Allah, my people would not be able to do this. And then Gabriel came to him and said, okay, you are now permitted to recite it in 7 dialects.
Wow.
So, you know, Gabriel first came and said in 1 dialect. And then Muhammad says, my people they're not capable of understanding it because of the dialectical differences, you know, all the different kinds of Arabic. And so Gabriel comes again and says, okay, do it 2. And then Muhammad says, no, they can't. And then Gabriel comes a third time and says, okay, 7 dialects. You can recite it in 7 dialects. And then listen to what he says. This is what Gabriel says. Allah has commanded you to recite the Quran to your people in 7 dialects, so the 7 dialects I just showed, and whichever dialect they recite, they will be right. Wow. And so, you know, so it's obvious that these dialects are different, or else there wouldn't have had to be this whole issue. And there's another story in the Quran, which in the hadith, what happened is that there was a man who was in the mosque, and he was reciting a chapter of the Quran. And another man, another one of the Sahaba, one of Muhammad's companions, heard him, and he said, wait a minute, you're not reciting it correctly. You know, you're saying it differently. That's not the way Muhammad taught us. And so he took the man by the neck. I mean, he took him by the ground, and he took him to Muhammad. And he said to Muhammad, he said, look at how this man is reciting the Quran. He's reciting it incorrectly, which could be a death penalty. I mean, this is you're to change the Quran. And so Muhammad said, okay, let the guy recite it. And he recited, and it was completely different from the way the other man was reciting it. And then it says that Muhammad, it literally says this, that Muhammad struck the man in the chest. And it says that a drop of sweat fell from his forehead when he did this. Wow. And Muhammad said to him, what this other man said is correct, because the Quran has been revealed in these 7 versions, and the way he recited it is as acceptable as the way you did. And it says that that man, he says that he almost lost his faith in Islam. His faith was so shaken. Why? Because he was told that there's one Quran, and you have to, it comes down exactly the same way all Muslims are taught. If you go on the street, talk to any Muslim, he's going to tell you this, that there's one Quran, it's exactly identical to what is in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. No one can change it, no one is allowed to change it. And so anyway, that is what is meant by the 7 modes. And this, what's significant about this is Muhammad himself said the Quran came down in these 7 modes.
Wow.
And, if we could also put up the next hadith, I just wanted to show you that how important it is that this Muhammad himself said there were 7 Qur'ans. It says in the Sahih al-Bukhari, part 2, page 851, Muhammad said the Quran came down in 7 modes. So this was still in Muhammad's time. While he was alive, he knew that there was these 7 different Qur'ans.
Yeah.
Well,
what happened to the 7 modes?
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing that, again, your grandfather has done a lot of episodes. In fact, he's doing a whole series of episodes right now specifically about this subject. And if you look at what happened after Muhammad died, what happened is that with these different modes of the Quran, these 7 different modes, what happened is that people in one part of the Muslim world began reciting the Quran in one particular mode, and people in another part began reciting it in a different way. And what happened is that, as was possibly to be expected, there started to be strife between them, and people started getting very angry, just like that one man who took the other man to Muhammad, And so what happened was, this was during the time of the caliph. There were several caliphs. These are the leaders. Muhammad's successor. Muhammad's first successor was Abu Bakr. Then there was Umar bin Khattab, and the third caliph, or the fourth caliph, was Uthman. And it was during the time of Uthman that there was almost a civil war that happened because of these different versions of the Quran. And so what happened is somebody came to Uthman and said to him, there's going to be a war because of all these different versions of the Quran.
Yeah.
And so what happened is Uthman says, well, bring all of those different versions together. And he went and collected all of those 7, and they're the 7 modes. These are the 7 ahruf, sab'a ahruf. He took all of them and he burned 6 of them. He burned them with fire. Wow. Literally eliminated them. And then he took the Quran of Hafsa, which was Muhammad's widow, and took hers, and he made that the standard Quran. So to where there was only that one. So I just want you to say, he took the 6 Qur'ans, these are of the 7 modes, he took 6 of them and burned them.
Wow.
So they no longer exist, and he left 1.
That's bizarre.
It's extremely bizarre. And then he made copies of that. It gets even more bizarre when you consider, we'll do another episode about the issue of diacritical marks. Diacritical marks is like, in the English language, it's like putting I dotting an I or putting a T, to show what the letters are. Well, in Arabic, there's like 18 of the letters of Arabic have a dot or a dash to show what that letter is.
Yeah.
Well, Uthman's Quran didn't have the dots and dashes. And so it was over 100 years later before they would put these diacritical marks on the Quran. And so, that's another huge change, and we'll do another episode about that. But anyway, he took that Quran that he made, and he made copies of it and sent them to all the major Islamic centers, which include Damascus, Kufa, Medina, Mecca, in Iraq. And so, he distributed his Quran, the Uthmani Quran, which Muslims believe today that what they have is the Uthmani Quran. But that's when we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, but anyway, I wanted to show this hadith. If we put up the next insert, and this is from a book. It's called Manahil al-Iran fi Ulum al-Quran by Zarqani, and it's part 1, page 183. And here's what he says. He says, the purpose for the burning of the other Qur'ans was to stop the struggle that lit up between the Muslims.
Wow.
So here he's admitting that there was these Qur'ans were burned by Uthman, and says, and the reason was to stop like a civil war that was beginning to rise up between the Muslims because of these different versions of the Quran.
That's crazy.
I mean, if you look at that, it raises so many questions.
It just doesn't make sense.
It's when you consider that they're saying that, first of all, how the 7 modes came into existence. That Muhammad was saying to Gabriel, my people aren't capable. And so, Gabriel kept making all these compromises. Now, if Gabriel did this, then you got to ask, well, were they inspired? Were those 7 versions inspired?
Yeah.
But if Gabriel said, what did Gabriel say? He says, the people can recite the Quran in any of these 7 modes, ahruf, and it will be right. And it will be right. And,
in the beginning, he said there's only one version.
In the beginning, Gabriel said, okay, just one. And then, these are some of the issues with the Quran. And again, I'm coming at it as someone who was 100% convinced.
Yeah.
I was willing to die. I was so convinced that the Quran is one. The Bible's been changed. The Bible's been corrupted. But the Quran cannot be changed. I was willing to die for that. And I know Muslims today are willing to die for their belief in the Quran. I still talk to Muslims. They still believe this. They're still convinced of this. And yet the evidence, even within the Sahih al-Bukhari, within Sahih Muslim, proves that that is not the case.
Yeah.
We've been lied to.
Yeah.
And I have a few questions about, before we go on to the next part, which is the recitations. I just have a few questions about the 7 modes, that I just would like to present to the Muslims, about this, the ahruf sab'a, the 7 modes. First of all, and this is a question that your grandfather always asked, which one of them is on the preserved tablet?
Yeah.
The preserved tablet is, Muslims consider the preserved tablet to be eternal. Eternal means it's not created. Right next to Allah, there's this preserved tablet, and it's not created. Eternal means it's not created.
Yeah.
Meaning it's divine. And that, Gabriel went and read it and brought to Muhammad. So, the question is, of the 7 ahruf that came to Muhammad, which one is on the preserved tablet?
Exactly.
Another question is, if all of them were inspired, like Muhammad said in the Sahih al-Bukhari, the Quran was revealed in 7 modes, 7 different versions, 7 dialects. The Quran was revealed in 7 languages. And if that's the case, how could Uthman burn them? Uthman burned 6 of them. How could he burn 6 of them if they were inspired by Allah? You know, you just got to think, wait a minute. If Gabriel said any of them that you recite is right, then how could Uthman come along to prevent a civil war and burn 6 inspired books?
It just doesn't make sense.
You know, it just shows you again that there's no logic to it. You know, it's like, it's these, you know, the solution that they came up with for this issue of the different dialects is not logical. And it just doesn't seem logical for Allah to do something like this. And another thing is, you know, when Allah sent it down in 7 modes, didn't he know that it could lead to this civil war? You know, didn't he know that if by revealing it in 7 different languages, that some people are going to grab onto this one and some people are going to grab onto this one, and they're going to fight each other and say, no, I got the right one, no, I got the right one. Because, you know, if you look at the way Muslims are so, you know, they're devout about the Quran, you know, and I know this, you know, because they're my relatives, and I know how committed they are to it. Like I said, they're willing to die for this. And that somebody comes and misquotes it or quotes it in a different way. You know, didn't Allah know when he allowed it to be revealed in 7 modes that it could lead to this problem?
Yeah.
Because it just seems like it took God by surprise, or took you know, Uthman, to where the only thing he could think to do was, okay, let's burn them all.
Yeah.
You know, and
Wow.
anyway, so that's you know, that's the issue of the 7 modes.
Yeah, well, we talked about the 7 modes. Now, what are the 7 recitations?
Okay, the recitations, and I'm not sure if we'll be able to get through everything we got to say today, so I just want to say one thing about the recitations really quickly. That the 7 modes were before the burning by Uthman. The burning of the Quran by Uthman is a very significant historical marking point in the history of the Quran. Okay, so the 7 modes were before Uthman. The 7 recitations are in relationship to that one Quran that Uthman sent down. The one Quran, you know, Uthman burned 6 of them, and he kept 1. He made copies of it and sent it to the main Islamic centers. The 7 recitations are in relation to that Quran, the Quran of Uthman. So this would be after Uthman. So the modes were before Uthman, the recitations are after Uthman. And so, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and show you what the 10 recitations are. Okay, it's in the next insert. Okay, these are the 7. I put 7 or 10. Because it may be 7 or it may be 10. And again, you know, don't need to ask for logic here, but these are the ones. Nafi al-Madani, which is in Medina, which is the city where Muhammad was buried, and where Muhammad spent most of his time as a prophet. Ibn Kathir al-Makki, that's from Mecca. Abu al-Amr al-Basri, and that would be in Basra. Ibn Amr al-Shami, and this one is in Syria. Asim al-Kufi in Kufa. Hamza al-Kufi, also in Kufa. Baden al-Kasai. These are the 7 recitations. And then there's also these 3. Abu Ja'far al-Madani, and that's also in Medina. Ya'qub ibn al-Basri in Basra. And Khalaf. Khalaf is the last one. And so you got, these are different recitations of Uthman's Quran. And so, again, we're dealing here with not just differences, you know, in the 7 modes that came to Muhammad, but now in the one Quran that survived the burning, that there have also become several different versions.
Yeah.
And I'd like to also show this. This is something that I found on the internet, and it says that 95% of the world recites the Hafs. These are the most famous kinds of Qur'ans that are in the world today. Now, if you ask, like I said again, you go back, look at the videos, look at the sheikhs, what they're saying on YouTube. They're all saying there's only one Qur'an. The Quran cannot be changed. It's perfect from Morocco to India to, this is what they say. And yet, there are these different versions, these recitations that are being used in different parts of the world. And right now, they say that 95% of the world uses the Hafs Quran. This is the most famous one. And the 3% of the world, and in fact, in the Middle East, and like in the Arabian Peninsula, they primarily use the Hafs. About 3% of the Muslim world uses the Warsh version. This is the second most famous Quran, is the Warsh. And the Warsh, they use that like in North Africa. Like you'll find it like in Morocco and Sudan. Then there's another one called Al-Qalun. And the interesting thing is, like I've watched your grandfather do program about, he actually has copies of these Qur'ans. He actually has them, and he shows them when he's doing his program. And so Al-Qalun is used like in Libya, Somalia, in different African countries. And then there's one called Al-Duri. Al-Duri is by Abu Amir, and then that's used by also about 3% of the Muslim world. And then there's 1% of the Muslim world uses Ibn Amir's version of the Quran. And so here you got all these different Quran, the Hafs, the Warsh, the Qalun, Al-Duri, and there's also another one that wasn't mentioned in this particular survey, and that's called the Al-Susi. That's a very famous one, which I believe they use in Sudan as well. So you got these 5 different Qur'ans, and and I've done programs about these 5 different Qur'ans, and about if you were to just take 2 of them and compare them. For instance, the 2 most famous ones, the Hafs and the Warsh. Those are the 2 most famous Qur'ans in the world. If you were to look at them, there are over 1,300 differences between this one and this one.
Wow.
And the differences, what are the differences? The differences are in the writing. The Arabic is beautiful language, is one of the most beautiful languages in the world, the Arabic, with its calligraphy, and the writing in the Quran. In that writing, there are differences between the Hafs and the Warsh. In the actual words, sometimes there's a difference. And then this is where, some Muslims will say, okay, we'll admit there's this, but there's also differences in the meaning.
Wow. There's
actually differences in the meanings. And so you see, when we're doing this, the important thing here is that this goes back. It goes back to the Quran itself.
Yeah.
And I've said it before, but I'm just going to say it again. The Quran itself says, chapter 15, verse 9, says that Allah says, I have revealed the Quran and I will preserve it. And Muslims' faith in the Quran, the faith in the Quran is so solid and based on this verse that Allah preserves the Quran, that Allah protects it from any error, protects it from any deletion, take something away, or any addition that people would add something to it. And yet, we got these 2 different Qur'ans, the Hafs and the Warsh, and we got more. We got the Qalun, the Susi, Duri, but that got 1,300 differences in it. And then you got to ask, okay, so if the Hafs says this and the Warsh says this, we got to go back. We got to go back to the verse, chapter 80 of the Quran, Surah 80 of the Quran, that talks about the preserved tablet again. Which one of these Qur'ans that is in the world today is on the Lawh al-Mahfuz? Which one is on the preserved tablet up in heaven? And you see, that's where the logic just goes, your brain goes on tilt trying to explain these things because, you know, first of all, the 7 modes doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that was allowed doesn't make sense. And then it doesn't make sense that Uthman was allowed to burn 6 of those inspired modes. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And then when you look that the Quran still says that it's perfectly preserved. It still says that it's on the Lawh al-Mahfuz, and yet there's all these different Qurans.
It just doesn't add up.
Yeah, it's just like, it's illogical. There is no logic into it, you know. And so, you know, this is some of the many issues that Islam has to deal with about, you know, this belief, you know. And you know, one thing that I've wanted to do on this program many times is to just say, listen, you guys, we were lied to.
Yeah.
We were lied to. And I want to say, we weren't lied to by my teachers, you know, in the school. It's not them, because they were lied to as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't our friends or my uncle, you know, like my Uncle Mahmoud. I always talk about him, that he's the one who really, you know, drove this home to me, that the gospel's been changed, but the Quran cannot be changed. He drove that into me when I was a kid, you know, and I was so convinced because of him more than anything. He didn't lie to me. He was lied to as well. And, you know, and one thing that I'd like to do, you know, right now, is I actually want to show a video where we have a Muslim sheikh, one of the most respected Muslim sheikhs in the world. His name is Muhammad Hassan, one of the most respected sheikhs in the world, actually talking about this. And I just, you know, just watch it and just look at the questions that it raises when you watch this video. It's in Arabic, but I put English subtitles onto it. Could we show the videos, please?
بأن الحديث الآن عن الأوجه صار حديثا للتأريخ، صار حديثا نظريا. ليه؟ لأن عثمان رضي الله عنه جمع الأمة على حرف واحد الذي به عن القراءات السبع المعروفة. كلام جميل. ارجع لعثمان بقى عشان تستوعب اللي هقوله. جاء حذيفة، سمع أهل الشام يقرؤون بقراءة وأهل العراق
And then we also have the 7 recitations. He's admitting they exist, and yet you can also find a sermon by him saying that the Quran is unchangeable from Morocco to India to America to and all over the world. So you're getting, it's called cognitive dissonance. You know, it's a condition. It's an actual mental condition called cognitive dissonance. And what this means is that you believe one thing and you believe the opposite at the same time.
Yeah.
You believe one thing and you believe the opposite at the same time. And so here they're saying the Quran cannot be changed. The Quran is one. And yet here the sheikh, one of the most respected sheikhs in the world, very well known, very highly respected, on television saying that there's a difference between the modes, 7 modes, and the 7 recitations. Meaning, just by doing that, he's acknowledging that there are these 7 modes and these 7 recitations, which, let's just add it together. If you got 7 modes, and then you got 7 or 10 recitations, that's 17 different Qur'ans.
Yeah.
And they're different from each other. Not one Quran, 17 different Quran. Just based on this, on what Sheikh Muhammad Hassan said, that admits that there are 17 different Qurans.
Yeah.
And yet, he'll come back at the same time and say, there's only one Quran.
Wow. Do any other Muslims talk about this?
You know, there's many other respectable scholars who say the same thing. If we could just look, put up the... this is what, I'll make sure that I get the right one. Yes, okay. This one says, the next insert says, many in general say that the 7 modes, or ahruf, are the same as the 7 recitations, qira'at. And this is ugly ignorance. The recitations are one thing, and the modes are another thing. Okay, and this is from a book that, your grandfather uses this book a lot. It's called Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran. Sureness in science of the Quran by, Jalal al-Suyuti. This man is greatly respected, and, he wrote one of the most famous study books of Islam, which is called Asbab al-Nuzul, which is an explanation of why particular verses of the Quran came down. It's one of the most essential books that every student of the Quran has to have, is to understand, this verse says this in the Quran. His book explains why that verse was revealed. Very famous book, very highly respected. And here he is admitting the existence of both the modes and the ahruf. Or that they existed because, as the Sheikh Muhammad Hassan said, the ahruf no longer exist because Uthman burned them. Okay, and then if we go back, this is from a website called Dar al-Quran. This is an Islamic website, and it's preaching Islam. And look what they say here. It says the recitations or the qira'at go back to the imams who recited the Quran, not to the rightly guided caliphs. And this is very interesting because, the caliphs, they're the ones who were the successors of Muhammad. But these are just, these imams, they took the Quran and they recited it differently. And so the recitation, unlike the modes, Muhammad said, came down from Gabriel himself. But the recitations go back to particular imams, like Hafs, Warsh, Qalun, they do not go back to the rightly guided caliph. There is no relationship between the 7 modes, which no longer exist. Uthman burned them. So, again, this is a very popular Islamic website, and they're just admitted very clearly that there are these 7 ahruf and these 7 recitations.
Yeah.
And it just goes back to, one more time. What about the one Quran? What about the belief in one Quran? And the reason why I keep pounding this, again, I'm going back to what your grandfather said, that there are many obstacles that stand between a Muslim and his acceptance of Christ.
Yeah.
Several obstacles that need to be removed to help a Muslim to understand the gospel.
Yeah, and those beliefs are one of them. Now,
this belief in the Quran is one of those obstacles.
Yeah.
Their absolute faith in the absolute inerrancy and immutability, which means unchangeableness of the Quran.
Yeah.
That is one of the big obstacles that keeps Muslims from accepting the Bible, accepting the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's why it's so important that we hit this thing and that we describe exactly that, wait a minute, this thing that you believed even from your own books, even from your own imams, even from Muhammad himself.
Yeah.
Because we have the Sheikh Muhammad, then we have the hadith, and we had Muhammad himself saying that these things are not true. There is not one Quran.
Yeah.
But, you know, like we said, up to 17 that we talked about so far.
That's crazy. Now, I would be pretty angry if I was a Muslim and I figured all these things out. Now, you probably seemed angry as well.
Well, you know, that's, you know, if you look over my episodes that I've done here, you know, this is one of the issues that I've hit at the most. And whenever I've done programs with your grandfather, this is the one that shocks me the most. And it's funny, if you look at, even with the other hosts, that when we do programs with your grandfather, this is always an issue that, you know, like I was watching some of the other hosts, and when your grandfather talks about this, it always like, whoa, you know, because we were so convinced
Yeah.
of the inerrancy of the Quran. We were, and even though I've been a believer for 40 years I've been a Christian, and yet that basic thought is still there, you know, and it went unchallenged for all these years until I started seeing what your grandfather, you know, presents, and then I started studying it by myself, and then having to translate it, you know, to learn about it even more. And yes, you know, like, you know, the one word you said there, angry. It does make me angry because I feel like, I mean, I have relatives who believe this still.
Yeah.
I have brothers and sisters, I have cousins, I have nieces and nephews who believe this. And I have relatives, I believe, and I hate to say this, that they may be in hell because of this teaching.
Yeah.
Because this teaching blocked them from pursuing the truth that's in the gospel.
Wow.
And so yeah, it does make me angry. It makes me feel like, wait a minute, we're lied to. And it's not just that we were lied to, we're still being lied to.
Yeah.
We're still being lied to. And, you know, if you go, like I said, just go on the street and ask any Muslim. They're still going to give you that same line. And they're willing to die for it.
Yeah.
And so, yes, that does make me mad. It makes me angry on the one hand. And like I said, it's not our teachers that were lying to us. It's not even sometimes our sheikhs that were lying to us. You know, there's somebody higher up. You know, I've heard that Saudi Arabia, they publish both Qur'ans while pushing the line that there's only one Qur'an. It's unchangeable, immutable, Allah, you know, it's of the preserved tablet. And yet, they're, at the same time, they're publishing these two Qur'ans. And why don't they tell the people, listen? Why don't they come out and just say, hey, listen, you know what? There's not just one Qur'an. There are many Qur'ans. And we're trying to find the best one, you know, and just come out and admit it. Say, hey, you know what? This isn't true. You know, so that they could stop telling the kids this, because this is what's being taught. So yeah, it does make me. But let me just say one other thing. It also makes me thankful. It makes me thankful for people, again, like your grandfather, like Jay Smith, like there's great Christian apologists who have given their life to teach the truth and expose the truth about this. And so I'm, you know, on the one hand I'm angry, but I'm also thankful, and thankful that I get to be a part of telling the truth about this issue, which is, you know, is so important, and it's so crucial, you know, and having been a Muslim, I understand how important this is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just curious, are there more than 7 or 10 versions of the Quran?
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of wanting to save this about the, you know, if I could just show one other thing just before I answer that question,
Okay.
because that is, you know, this is such an important question, you know.
Okay.
But I just want to show my last insert, because, and I think you know this, you know, and I keep, you know, talking about your grandfather, but, you know, a lot of it, I learned so much of this from him. There's a book, you know, that was written by the scholars of Al-Azhar University. Al-Azhar is the most respected. It's like, you know, some people criticized me for saying this before, but kind of like the Vatican of the Sunni Islamic world. They're so important. You know, they're the ones who come out with the fatwas and say, you know, this is what Allah means, this is what the Quran means, and they are the ones who like educate some of the most respected sheikhs in all of the Sunni Muslim world. And so anyway, your grandfather, when he started doing his programs, you know, like 20 years ago, 18 years ago, like Hawar al-Haq and all these different programs, it literally caused an earthquake in the Muslim world because nobody had confronted these things before. And there was a group at Al-Azhar University, top 5 sheikhs, scholars, who wrote a book in response to your grandfather. And the name of that book, and I'll say it in Arabic, but I'm gonna massacre it. But it's حقائق الإسلام في مواجهة شبهات المشككين. In English, it's the facts of Islam in face of the suspicions of skeptics. So they wrote this book, and I guess like 700 pages long in Arabic, you know, and it talks about, addresses these issues that your grandfather raised about this particular subject. And again, this is the most respected Sunni Islamic institution, you know, in the world. And listen to what they said. They says about the definition of recitations. The recitations are what exists today.
Yeah.
Okay, it says there are differences of words of the inspired texts in the letters or the shapes. So they're saying between these different recitations, there's differences of words and the shapes of the letters. I mean, they know this. They know, you know, this is why I'm feeling that like they're lying to us. They're lying to, why is it if they know this, that people are still saying, no, the Quran is unchangeable, it's the Lawh al-Mahfuz, and all these things, you know?
Yeah.
Being lied to, you know? And so anyway, I just wanted to say that, and the fact that they wrote that in response to your grandfather, thank God your grandfather exposed these things, you know, to where they got a response. But, you know, the thing is that this is supposed to defend Islam. It doesn't.
Exactly.
You know, it's like they're saying, wait a minute, this is our defense. It's like, no, I don't think you defended it at all. I think what you did is you just absolutely validated what he said.
Yeah.
That these things exist and that these things are different from each other and that people are being lied to.
Yeah.
You know, and so anyway, but you know, just going back to your question about, you know, are there different Qur'ans? And you know, I just, you know, this is like the if we could just put up the last insert. You know, this is a friend of mine who's done a program here with me before. He actually did it on Skype. His name is Jay Smith, and this man he was born in India, and he was raised, you know, by Christian missionaries, and he's a Christian missionary, and he was a Christian missionary in London, England, and he goes to this place called Speaker's Corner, and this is where the Muslims come out. The Muslims come out in Speaker's Corner. There's just so many Muslim sheikhs preaching out there in Speaker's. Over there on Speaker's Corner, it's like this special bubble where you can say anything. It's just like it's total freedom of speech. It's the only place like it in the world. You know, it's in London. And this guy, he went and he started preaching the gospel there. You know, God told him that he would take a ladder, he'd step on the ladder and start preaching the gospel to the Muslims, dealing with Islamic issues. He was so good that the Muslims stopped their preaching there. But the Muslims keep coming. And they attacked him, they beat him up, he was this close to death. One time he was beat up so bad for preaching, but he goes every single week. He's been going for years, he's been doing this. But anyway, there is a video that he did with a young woman from Turkey. And this young woman from Turkey has traveled to all these different countries, and I hope I'm going to be able to get this young woman on the program someday. But she's traveled to all these Muslim countries just to see the Quran. She's an ex-Muslim. She got saved. And she got these Qurans. And they found 26 different Qurans.
Wow.
26 Qurans are being used in the world today. You go to different, I know, and each one of them, I bet you every single one of them is told that every Quran in the world is exactly like this one. And this is the one that's on the Lawh al-Mahfuz, and it's unchangeable, and Allah has preserved it. Every single one of them believe that now. But and they believe there's many more. They believe there's many more. These are just the ones that they have so far. 26 different Qur'ans. Could we put up that last insert again, just so in case anybody wants to go, you can actually go to the video. You can actually go to the video. It's on YouTube. This is the video on YouTube. 26 different Arabic Qur'ans destroy the myth of one Qur'an. It's on YouTube. You can actually watch the confrontation at Speaker's Corner when she's opening the Qur'an, and then not only is she showing them, she actually has the physical books. Wow. She has the physical 26 Qur'ans there. Not only do they open it and they show it to these Muslims who are, just wanting to, destroy them, they're actually opening them and reading a verse and then reading how it's different from the next verse.
Yeah.
And they've been studying these Qur'ans like for several years, and they have found so far over 5,000 differences between these Qur'ans. Over 5,000 differences between them. And so again, I encourage you, go look at that. 26 different Arabic Qur'ans destroy the myth of one Qur'an. And so, yes, there's more than these 7 and 4. I wanted to do this thing about the modes in the recitation, because with this issue of the modes in the recitation, 7 modes and 7 recitation, you have most respected Islamic sources admitting that they exist.
Yeah.
We don't have the Islamic sources admitting this yet, but they are admitting this, meaning they knew about it, and they're still telling us there's only one Qur'an, meaning that they're lying to us,
yeah.
And they've been lying to us. And so,
what do you think should be done by that?
Yeah, this is, if I could just go back to what your grandfather said, I want, this is such a dangerous thing. I'll just say that your grandfather said it, but it is, he says some of the funniest things, and he says we need another Uthman. We need a new Uthman. Because Uthman saw that there was all these gazillions of Qur'ans, and what he did, he grabbed them together and burned them. He's saying, now we got all these other new Qur'ans that came out. And he says, we need a new Uthman to come gather them together and just burn the whole thing. From the work that your grandfather has done, they've stopped using some of the books, or they've changed things, or they erased things, And he says, oh, that's great. That's great that you're doing that, but you got to finish the job. Just get rid of the whole thing,
Exactly.
So anyway, this is just an issue that is so, for me, it really touches me where I am. Like I said, I got relatives that still believe this thing. My beloved people, my village, and everything, and that's why I wanted to talk about this today. So.
Wow, great subject, Steve. Thank you for bringing it to their attention.
Yes.
And hopefully they keep an open mind.
Yeah. And another thing that we do, this is, that's one reason I'm so glad that you could be and that you've been, being with us, is that we can talk about it, and we can just also preach the good news of the gospel. We're not just trying to take something away.
Exactly.
We want to give them something. And that's what happened with me. I was a very devout Muslim, but then I met the Lord Jesus. He gave me life.
Yeah.
And I know that you've met the Lord Jesus in a powerful way. And he gave you life. And so just kind of we got just a few minutes left here right now. Why don't you just, in light of what you've heard today, okay? And I'll kind of put you on the spot here, but you've got the call of God and the anointing of God on you. So why don't you just look into that camera and you speak to the Muslims.
Of course. Well, I want to let you guys know that obviously you are loved, and I think the biggest thing is that, Muslims, when they hear this kind of stuff, they're kind of taken back, and that's normal, but I just ask that you guys keep an open mind, and, when you hear Steve, when you hear Father Zachariah, when you hear Johanna or Jafar or anyone, to just keep an open mind and pursue it, test it out, see if it's true, see if it's false,
Right.
and trust your gut. You know, if the proof is there, if it's hard evidence are there, if you see the differences in the Qur'ans, if you see how there's discrepancies, how, you know, one is contradicting the other, think about it and think, okay, maybe this religion isn't really a true religion. Maybe I should pursue something else. And then tap into, you know, ask God what you should pursue into, and God will guide you to that.
That's great.
You know, and I think at the end of the day, if you see a God of love, you know that's a true God.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
God who loves you.
Exactly.
Yes, amen.
Exactly.
If I just, this is the last thing, just close out saying this, say, you know, I like what Jacob said, you know, and that is that you ask God, the Creator, say, God, I can't believe this. I don't want to believe that this is true, but if this is the truth, I need help, and I need you to move. I need you to give me the truth. I need you, God, to show me the truth. Open my eyes, open my heart. Show me who Jesus Christ is. Show me the truth. In Jesus' name, God loves you, and He's going to hear. If your heart is really open, He's going to come. He's going to fill your heart. Thank you so much, Jacob, for being with me. This was a hard subject, so I needed help today, so I appreciate you being with me today.
I'm glad to be here, Steve.
And thank you to all our viewers for being with us, and I hope that you can also be with us in a future episode of this program, Message of Grace.